You're the only voice of reason on the radio.
You give me hope.
Having listened to you every day.
Thank you for your clear insight.
Always felt a little bit smarter.
I listen to you every single day. I keep coming back to this station, and thank you for what you do.
On WCPT 820, Chicago's Progressive Talk.
WCPT 820, Chicago's Progressive Talk, where facts matter.
All right, this is exciting, isn't it?
Here we go, guys, in 5, 4, 3. Here we go.
It's time for Joan Esposito. Live, local, and progressive.
Thank you for the good programming, and I appreciate the content and really enjoyed every moment.
It's a privilege to have you on your station and listen. It's good stuff. It's very educational.
It's time for Joan Esposito on WCPT 820, Chicago's Progressive Talk.
Howdy, it is Thursday, August 6th. Is it really, though? Is it really time for Joan Esposito? You know, I hear these lead-ins, and they make me question, you know, like the one on Monday where it's like, this is exciting. I feel really raises the bar, and I'm not sure that it's a bar I can meet every single Monday. And I think I'm going to have Dan Levy re-record some of this, like, you know, it's Joan Esposito. Don't have expectations that are too high. It's Joan Esposito. She's going to do the best she can. I think that would be much less pressure on me, you know? I don't know how you feel about this. Maybe you don't even listen to, maybe you don't expect me to perform to that level every day. Maybe it's just something that I've invented in my head. But you know, one thing I was thinking about for the weekend, because, you know, as I've told you, I now need a 3-day weekend. So tomorrow, Friday, is the first day of the weekend. I'll still be here talking to you, but it's going to be loosey-goosey because, you know, it's the weekend. And I've been thinking about this cyclospora outbreak. If salad is no longer safe, does that mean we should be eating donuts instead? Honestly, have you ever heard of a donut recall? I haven't. I give you permission until this cyclospora thing is well in hand or behind us. I give you permission to eat donuts every time you're thinking about eating salad. Personally, my favorite is the Krispy Kreme cream-filled donut. Not other cream-filled donuts, because as you know, if you are an expert on this, most cream-filled donuts are really just filled with pudding. It's pudding, it's not cream. But Krispy Kreme cream-filled donuts are filled with this sort of like whipped frosting kind of thing. That works for me. I like my sugar covered by fried sugar coated with a glaze of sugar. Okay, I read something interesting this morning. It said that Iran was close to a deal with Oman about the Strait of Hormuz. Wait a minute. Aren't they supposed to be negotiating with us? Aren't we supposed to be the ones telling people what will and will not happen with the Strait of Hormuz? Iran is negotiating with Oman, and they're close to an agreement. What happened to us? Did we just back away? Did we just turn it over to them? I mean, we might have. Donald Trump probably thought to himself, hell, I don't know what to do. Maybe these guys will. Let's just put them in a room together. Besides, Donald Trump is too busy being angry at Pete Hegseth, because apparently Donald Trump from the reading I've done, I don't know whether he felt he was misled or simply not informed that we were running out of munitions. And, you know, public, he's like, oh, I'm still behind Pete Hegseth 1,000%. But I think that's because Pete Hegseth threw his number two, his deputy, under the bus. Because Donald Trump very carefully did not say that I am supportive of Hegseth and his deputy? No. You know Hegseth. He's greasy and slimy. Can you imagine him in a meeting with Trump where Trump is raving about the fact that we are low on munitions? You think Pete Hegseth is going to say, well, I don't have any experience in this job. I didn't realize I was supposed to keep account of things? Come on. What these people who owe everything to Trump do to stay in Trump's good graces is they find someone else to throw under the bus. We saw the perfect example of that with Jeanine Pirro. She dropped all the charges against everybody who was accused of vandalizing the reflecting pool, not just the most prominent case, but all the cases. And when she and Doug Burgum and Susie Wiles and Donald Trump sat down to talk about it, and Donald Trump was furious. He said she choked. She was afraid to fight the good fight. And she didn't say what you've been telling the country is a lie. She said, Doug Burgum misled you. Doug Burgum misled you. He is the one who was trying to cover up for the Park Service problems. The Park Service problems were the fact that Donald Trump gave the contract to one of his buddies, a no-bid contract, to one of his Mar-a-Lago friends, who messed it up. But you can never tell Trump he's responsible. So Jeanine Pirro is like, Doug Burgum misled you. Doug Burgum lied to me. Doug Burgum claimed he had all this proof and he didn't. It's his fault. And I believe that that's what Pete Hegseth is doing. He's saying, I left it to my deputy to compile all these numbers and keep us in the loop and up to speed. And my deputy dropped the ball. Hegseth's got one of his real skills is how to survive. And that's what he's doing. So supposedly the number 2 at the Pentagon has been holding emergency meetings because they have been asked, why don't we have more munitions? Why aren't we just making more? Why are we running low? And it wasn't even about, what if we have to go to war with China? That wasn't even it. The concern is we don't even have enough munitions to really continue a war against Iran. And Donnie's not happy with that. Donnie is not happy with that. So Hegseth did the Trumpian thing and found somebody else to blame. Oh, by the way, you might have also seen a report on the military promotions to the highest levels. There is a graph that one of the mainstream media people did of the number of women promoted on a yearly basis into the upper reaches of military leadership. It's high, a little less high, a little bit less high, down. And this year, under Hegseth, you can barely find the line. It is so far down. Pete Hegseth has made it clear the military is the purview of white men with lots of testosterone. Yep. So, yeah, if you are, I really feel sorry. If you're a woman who's looking for a career, you now know, at least for Hegseth's tenure, you know that this is not the career it could have been. What I feel sorry for are the women who've committed to this career, the women who should have, with this last round of promotions, been bumped up, and we're not. Hell, I guess under Pete Hegseth, they're lucky they weren't purged entirely, because the women who have reached the highest levels, along with African Americans who've reached the highest levels, they're on very thin ice with Pete Hegseth. Very, very, very thin ice. So, the New York Times is like, oh, deal on the Strait of Hormuz is close. But I liked what the Guardian U.S. wrote. I thought it was a little clearer. Iran says a deal with Oman to reopen the Strait of Hormuz is close to being finalized. Not a deal with Jared Kushner or Steve Witkoff or whatever else goof guy we have sent to try to negotiate something. Nope. Oh, by the way, that graph I was telling you about, it was published by the New York Times. It looked at military promotions from 2002 to 2026. They have never, promotions of women to high-ranking positions have never in the last 24 years been as low as they are right now. So, Iran is close to a deal, but not with us. I don't even know if we're a part of it. I don't know. Is there a second deal? I don't know. Nobody's really talking about it that much right now. So I guess we're just going to wait and let Iran and Oman figure this out themselves. Okay. All right. Donald Trump really, 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 really wants to move on. And if this is what it takes, so be it. So be it. You saw the hearing where Rand Paul subpoenaed Dr. Fauci. And the Republicans basically just wanted to yell at him, and somehow COVID was Fauci's fault. Yeah, everything that went wrong. We didn't have more than 1 million deaths because of Donald Trump. Somehow it's all Anthony Fauci. Yeah. That was disgraceful enough. But now, on a partisan line vote, the vote is to hold Anthony Fauci in contempt. Now, remember, Congressman Jim Jordan from Ohio was subpoenaed to testify before a committee, and he has refused the subpoena. Fauci showed up. He knew it was a witch hunt, so he just took the fifth, like Donald Trump has done before. But apparently, if Donald Trump takes the fifth, it's okay. And if Jim Jordan ignores a subpoena, that's okay. But if you honor the subpoena and take the fifth, you are in contempt of Congress. Dick Durbin took the floor today to talk about just how embarrassed he thought it was, how far the Senate has fallen now that this is happening, and what a disgrace it was. I posted something on Blue Sky at joanesposito.bsky.social. Do you remember when Al Franken was a senator? He wrote a book about his experiences. This was before he left the Senate, obviously. And he said that he was once in a Senate committee hearing, and I don't know what it was about. I don't know who testified and what the subject matter was, but apparently Al Franken thought it was so absurd what was happening that at one point he didn't say anything. He rolled his eyes. He said that after that committee meeting was over, none other than Mitch McConnell took him aside and said to him, we don't behave that way in the Senate. You're a senator now, and that we operate with decorum. And that kind of nonsense might be okay for a comedy show, but we don't behave that way in the Senate. And Al Franken said he really took that to heart because he didn't want to be the one that brought down the standards. He rolled his eyes. That's all he did. And Mitch McConnell tore him a new one. Do you remember when the Senate used to be like that? When there actually was decorum, and even if somebody was testifying who you really didn't like, you might have asked them tough questions, but you didn't scream at them. You didn't call them names. We have lost so much. We have lost so much of basic politeness. Now you score points if you're crude and rude and loud. And isn't that just what we really want to be, crude and rude and loud? Mm-hmm. There is, Lady B, I actually sent some sound of Dick Durbin defending Anthony Fauci. Lady B has that. Let's listen to that now. Moving on. I want to talk some more about Max Miller. Apparently, the pressure to get this Ohio congressman to drop out of his reelection race is mounting. One conservative radio host said that he thinks if Max Miller stays in the race, people will be so disgusted with Republicans that not only will Max Miller lose his seat, but Ohio might lose other seats as well with some kind of a, I don't know, maybe Republicans will stay at home, There is more that has come out about Max Miller, and it ain't pretty. It ain't pretty, kids. It is the fact that his daughter, the 2.5-year-old daughter, who he's accused of breaking her collarbone, and police said that they couldn't determine for sure that the break was abuse. But remember, there was reporting that a child services officer, when they examined the injury, said that there was bruising that certainly looked like fingers. It certainly looked to the child services expert like somebody had grabbed this kid with their hand. But, that's not irrefutable evidence. So he was not charged with abusing his daughter. But apparently, you know how some kids develop a real attachment to a certain stuffed animal. Some kids call it a lovey or whatever. But that stuffed animal goes everywhere with them. And it is a stuffed animal that basically helps them manage anxiety and fear. Apparently, Max Miller's daughter has one of these. It's a blue bunny. And when his daughter has been spending time with him at his residence, she brings the blue bunny. And even though everybody else in this kid's life knows that this bunny is hugely important to the kid, apparently she left it at Max Miller's house, and his ex-wife was, can we pick it up? Please, please, please. She's really beside herself that she doesn't have her blue bunny. Max Miller, you want to talk about petty? Refused to give up the blue bunny. He knew how his daughter valued it. We all know that there are kids that attach themselves to a stuffed animal. Hell, some of them end up taking that stuffed animal with them when they go away to college. So why? If you understand your kid, if you care about your kid, how many people have gone somewhere with a kid and they drop their favorite stuffed animal, and once you realize it, you turn around and you spend an hour or more figuring out where the kid left it or dropped it because you know you've got to get it back? Yeah, apparently Max Miller, even though there are emails. Read Abby Vasulis in Mother Jones. She's got the emails. She prints them out of family members begging him to let them have the blue bunny, and he will not. He will not. Clearly, he knows this is going to hurt his kid, but is that really who he's trying to hurt? I think it's he's trying to punish his ex-wife. That's what it seems like to me. He clearly doesn't care that his kid is going to be beside herself without this stuffed animal. Michael Wolff, who always talks about Trump, he actually posted something today about Wolff's relationship with Max Miller. I think it's really interesting. Listen to this.
I want to try to explain the relationship of Donald Trump to Max Miller, the Ohio congressman and alleged wife beater. Max Miller is an absolute albatross around Trump's neck, but he won't dump him. Why? Max was a gopher during the 2016 campaign. Young guy, distinguished by the fact that he was even more of a suck-up than all of the other suck-ups. And Trump loved him. My Max. And then he went into the White House and had all kinds of jobs that he was not particularly qualified for. Now, he's a congressman in Ohio, where he married the daughter of the senior senator of Ohio. You get the picture of this Max's career. Now, the daughter of the senior senator from Ohio has accused Max of all kinds of vile things. There's enormous pressure on Trump from almost everybody in the party and from the senior senator in Ohio to dump Max, to no longer support Max in his congressional race, not least of all because he could very well lose this important race. But Trump won't. Here's the insight. The battle Trump is always fighting is against people telling him what to do, even if it's something to his own advantage. What's inside Trump's head is, no one is the boss of me. I tell people what to do. They don't tell me what to do. I'm right, and any suggestion otherwise means you are doubly wrong. I am Donald Trump, and you are not. And the proof of that is that I'm going to go on and support Max Miller, my Max. And this is how things are done in the Trump White House.
My Max. Yep. Birds of a feather. So far, Max Miller is still in the race. But if he doesn't drop out by, I think it's the 10th. I think if he's not gone by August 10th, he cannot be replaced, and he will be on the ballot. You know, I guess we'll just see how it plays out. Let's take a break. We're going to get to your texts and your calls right after this.
This is Chicago's Progressive Talk, 820 AM, WCPT Willow Springs, and online at WCPT820.com, where facts matter.
Want to join the conversation?
I'm going to say exactly what I think here.
Got something to say?
Everyone needs to hear what I got to say.
Call Joan now at 773-763-9278 and join the conversation. Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on Chicago's Progressive Talk, WCPT 820.
Somebody texted in that that I implying that I misrepresented the statistics about women and African Americans not getting promoted to the highest ranks by Pete Hegseth. And they sent me this, what appears to be like a Google AI search. Now, according to the New York Times, women account for only 4% of the candidates to be promoted. But of the promotions, the 40 promotions that Hegseth blocked, half of them were women and people of color. If you only comprise 4% of the military, and there are still as many, for lack of a better term, roadblocks in your path, the numbers, sweetheart, don't compute. That is still an outrageous number of women and especially African Americans being denied promotion by Pete Hegseth. You know, I am sending you, can I get this on the text line? Yes. I'm sending you the graphic that the New York Times put up. And, you know, if I had everybody's email address, I would gift this to you. But the graphic shows quite plainly that Pete Hegseth does not want women in the military. Somebody else, Jim from Crest Hill, texted in, I'm sure you heard what the FCC board did today. That vote will just pave the way for more control by billionaires and more media monopolies. Disgusting. Yes, I did see that, Jim. Brendan Carr's Federal Communications Commission, in a 2-to-1 vote, decided that, you know, there used to be caps. There were caps on how many local TV stations a company could own, because the belief was that they didn't want one company's ideas or bias to stretch from one end of the country to the other. They wanted balance. Remember balance? So there was a cap on how much of the country your local stations could represent. But Nexstar wants to merge with Tegna, which would blow through that cap. And in a 2-to-1 vote, the FCC said, you know what? It's not really that big a deal. So what if there's one company that is behind the vast majority of local news stations? What could possibly go wrong? Seriously, what could possibly go wrong? And yes, thank you. Thank you for the graphic. I know you wrote about Mitch McConnell leaving the rehab facility today. Hopefully somebody will get some video of that so we know for sure he's really around. Have you seen Donald Trump's new hairpiece? Oh my God. Or maybe it's a full wig. Oh my God, it's absurd. It's ridiculous. It is laughable. It is this big, fluffy head of golden blonde hair that looks nothing like the Donald Trump you've seen. I mean, does anybody say to this guy, Mr. President, you know, that looks a little fake. Mr. President, you know, to go from a guy who barely has any hair and has to wrap it all around his head and spray it within an inch of his life, Mr. President, to go from that to this big, thick, long, full head of blonde hair, maybe you should, if you do want the big, thick, look, maybe you should do it in steps. Get people used to something that's a little thicker, and then maybe in 5 months, something that's a little thicker. So it isn't this one day you look like a bald old man, and the next day you look like you're trying to look like, I don't know what, a game show host? Anyway, you got to look it up. It is very, very silly. Let's go to the phone lines. Let's go to the west suburbs where TR is on the line. Hey, thanks for the call today.
Thanks for taking my call, Joan. Well, you're talking about the hair issue. One would wonder, this isn't what I'm calling about, but one would wonder, can you imagine during the course of a year, the time that he primps and puts makeup on, and probably as long as RuPaul takes any. but that's okay. These people have no self-awareness, and what I'm going to say, I'm going to touch on Max Miller a little bit, but I know. And I found out there are a lot of Kool-Aid drinking enablers, and you probably get the text. They are monitoring your fine program, and they can't handle the truth or a different. They're in that thought bubble when they turn on AON, Fox, you name it, Newsmax, and they get their talking points first thing in the morning, and that's all you hear them say. And it is these people, but they're starting to, some of them are starting to wake up, because when they go to the gas pump, when they go to the register and check out at the grocery store, they shop unlike this other moron in this regime that they have not shopped in probably their whole lives, so they're so out of touch they don't care. But I wanted to touch on Max Miller real quick, and you were going through some of the reprehensible things. I have daughters, I have granddaughters, and I know some things, as people have said in the movies, and if that person did things to my daughter or my granddaughter, he would have hell to pay from me, or I would be making a few phone calls.
Yep.
It wouldn't be, hands down. He would. I don't even want to get into it, but let's get into something else that really blew my mind. Are you aware of who owns the Zorro Ranch and what's going on there now?
The Zorro Ranch that he's referring to is in New Mexico. It was once owned by Jeffrey Epstein, and even when law enforcement, they went to his island, they tore up his Manhattan townhouse, but nobody did anything about this ranch where supposedly a lot of abuse took place, and there were even rumors that people might have, the ranch is up against a bunch of federal land, and there were rumors that there may have been deaths, bodies carried out into the federal land and buried, and everybody just, I don't know, law enforcement just seemed to kind of skip it. And what happened was it was bought. It was put up for sale, and somebody bought it. So then when law enforcement wanted to, examine the house and examine the yard, it was private property, not owned by Epstein at that point. And, they had to get permission of the homeowners. And the homeowners gave them permission to do a very, very, very limited search. And then the homeowners said, okay, it's time for you to go. And they went. And since then, my understanding is that the homeowners have not been cooperative, that they didn't want the FBI back. They didn't want, the FBI, using ground penetrating radar or LIDAR to see if there's bodies buried on their property. They just have been putting up roadblocks. So they waited too long, and now they have these problems.
Well, wait till this is what blew my mind. The owner is one Don Heffines. Now, this isn't fake news. He is he ran for Texas comptroller, I believe, and he is one of Trump endorsed him. He owns this. He renamed it, and he's doing a bunch of new construction and digging, which the local authorities are not aware of and they are not happy about. It's blowing up, literally blowing up. Now, can you imagine, okay, it's Epstein's ranch, Zorro Ranch. They're trying to get rid of that. And who buys it? One of Trump's, and I'm going to just go out and say this. I'm going to say it real slow so all these Kool-Aid drinking enablers can hear this. When Hillary said a bucket of deplorables, that Max Miller, and she got such a pushback. Well, we saw a lot of deplorables on January 6th, and Max Miller is a deplorable. They're all one of the same, and it's not the Republican Party anymore. It's the Republican Party, as they call the Democrats. They don't call it the Democratic Party. It's Democrat. You know, they say it very, very tersely. But
I have to get to a break. I'm going to have to wrap this up. We are going to take more calls. I know we have a whole bunch of people on the phone lines. We are going to try to get to each and every one of you right after this.
This is WCPT 820, where facts matter.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive. Every weekday afternoon from 2 to 5 p.m. on WCPT 820.
Okay, I have been a little too chatty. We have the phone lines are stacked up like planes over O'Hare, so I'm going to try to keep it to a 2-minute rule. Okay, let's go to Ron from Chicago. Ron, you have 2 minutes.
Okay, I'll make it 1 minute.
Okay.
Yeah. Ted Blanche becoming the Attorney General is not a done deal because Susan Collins says that she's going to vote no, and if there's one more Republican senator voting no, then he won't be there. He won't get it. So.
Yeah, and supposedly the other two senators who are wobbly are Lisa Murkowski and Bill Cassidy, and I believe it was yesterday, Blanche met with them privately. Somebody got a picture of them because, they all move. They have tunnels and they have these little trains and golf carts and things. Somebody got a picture of him on the Senate tram, and he was slumped in the corner with his hands over his face. So, yeah, if we can get Lisa Murkowski and or Bill Cassidy, maybe we can keep this from happening. But let's hope so. Let's hope so.
Yeah, and let's hope that John Fetterman doesn't vote with the Republicans. That's another question mark, too. All right.
Yeah,
okay.
John Fetterman, his days are numbered. Nobody is going to vote for him again. He's not Republican enough to get Republican votes, and he's not Democratic enough to get Democratic votes. So I hope he's enjoying the last remaining days he has in the Senate, because he's never going to be there again.
Okay. All right.
Thanks. Thanks, Ron. Okay, let's go to our good friend Dave, who's on the line from Huffman Estates. 2-minute rule, Dave. Let's go.
Bing, 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 bing. Yeah, I liked it this morning when Stephanie Miller called it a wig on a pig. But and a little bit more on that Rogers I was working on yesterday. When he was a representative, 2002, he voted against the McCain-Feingold campaign finance reform. Or in 2006, his vote against restricting lobbyist gifts. And this one's kind of important with the Rogers had continued to campaign from his Florida mansion while running for the U.S. Senate.
Yeah, that's my favorite one. He lives in Florida. Oh, no, he doesn't live in Florida. He's got like I live in, no, I don't live in Florida. I'm sorry. You're mistaken.
He said, I'd rather be on the beach in Florida than spend time campaigning in Michigan.
There you go.
Like I said, you got
fine human being.
You got two carpetbaggers up there because up in the representative in the first, that Jack Bergman, he lives in Louisiana, and these people stupidly keep voting them in.
Unbelievable. I don't understand why that happens. I really, really don't understand why that happens. I guess maybe they just count on the fact that there are people who vote for a certain party no matter what. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And then Iran has made a concerted diplomatic push with Gulf states warning them explicitly that Tehran will hit their oil, power, and water plants unless they persuade Donald Trump to end U.S. strikes on Iran and instead seek a negotiated end to the war. The warning envisaged attacks on the energy facilities, oil fields, refineries, electricity grids, water infrastructure, transport networks, and other strategic assets of Washington's closest Arab allies, according to a senior Iranian official. And then let me get off so others can go through, but I just thought I'd touch base with those couple of little tidbits of news.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dave. Always
right,
a pleasure to chat with you. Let us go to our other Dave, Chi-Town Dave. Okay, it's the 2-minute lightning round. Chi-Town Dave, go for it.
Okay, I understand. Hey, I just wanted to tell you, I love donuts. And I love those cream donuts.
Oh, yeah.
I love those things. All of the ones you described, and I like the custard ones, too.
Yeah, well, I'm not really. If I'm going to have pudding, I'd rather have pudding in a dish. Now, if it's fruit filled or jam filled, that might be a decent second. But I want my sugar fluff inside the sugar donut with a sugar coating. I'm a simple woman.
I love the pudding. I love pudding in anything. Doesn't matter whether it's in cake or whether it's in a donut. Hey, I felt so sorry for Dr. Fauci. Why are they bashing him so much?
That's a really good question, and especially after all this time. I don't know, there must be something happened that Rand Paul can't seem to get over. I don't get it.
Why is Rand Paul so mad at him?
I don't know. We need to do a deep dive into that. We need to start reading about that and trying to figure it out, because it's so weird. Maybe if it had happened, at the time, we could have said, well, he's weird, but he's just trying to get to the bottom of things. But he's not after all this time.
Republican callers in? Could we get some Republican listeners in to tell us why they're mad? Why they're so mad at Mr. Fauci?
Maybe it's because they believe that if they can create a narrative where Fauci is responsible for all the bad things that happened in COVID, that people will forget that it was actually Donald Trump who was responsible for all the bad things that happened when we had COVID. That's the only thing I can think.
Donald Trump was responsible for all the deaths from COVID. I'm telling you, he was responsible.
Of course he was
responsible.
Yep. And, months before it got really bad, he told Bob Woodward in an interview that Bob Woodward was doing for his book. It's really bad. It's a lot badder. It's a lot worse than people think. It's really going to be bad. Okay.
He was telling people to drink bleach.
Yep. People died listening to Donald Trump with his crazy remedies. And I don't even understand where he got those ideas, but man, once he gets an idea, he latches onto it. Oh, I gotta go. Thanks so much for the call. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you.
Let's go to Al, who's on the line from Franklin Park. Hello, Al.
Hello, Joan. Lots going on, isn't there?
Yes, there is.
The Dr. Fauci deal is it's just another distraction, and they know that, and they're using it. But and we can go into lots of distractions, but what we got to focus on is that I believe it's 89 days to the election, and we got to keep our eye on that prize right now.
That's right.
We are not living in normal times, and we have to figure out ways that we can help get the vote out and talk to people right now. There's so much good information on our side that is out there that we need to get into people's minds, because we have this huge media machine against us right now. And you mentioned Fox News, and you mentioned a couple of the mergers that are trying to happen. They are trying everything right now to win, and we're not going to let them. And it just is figuring out what we can do right now. I'm most mornings I'm on the northwest suburbs organizing for action, Zoom call, and all these people are about finding ways to be active in the communities, active in tabling, talking about what they are doing. Everybody would rather be doing something else, but right now, we have to beat this fascism. And
right, it's all hands on deck.
it's all hands on that. And with that, in the morning meetings, they set a 1-minute timer for us. So we only got 1 minute to talk. And then you got to come back around again, but you are able to do that. So it's a Zoom call, and there's usually over 50 people on it every morning. So it's, man, just a lot of great people all trying to help. And we're just up against a real monster, but we just can't let him win. We just got to figure out how to get our out above all the noise out there.
I agree. And I think that's what you make a good point, and something we have to remember. We absolutely have to remember. So thank you for reminding us, and thank you so much for the call today. I appreciate it very, very much. Let us go to Seattle, where our good friend Paul is on the line. Hello, Paul.
Hello, Joan. You know, this dirtbag Congressman Max Miller.
Oh, I was going to say which one, because I think there's more than one. But yes, he's the dirtiest of the dirtbags.
Well, yeah, they're all dirtbags. But, well, and that's part of the point, too, is that he was asked about abuse of this 2.5-year-old daughter of his. And it's very telling how he responded. First of all, he didn't deny it. He said, of the interview, so apparently, reportedly, this little girl said to healthcare workers, "Daddy, kill mommy." And he said, "Well, how do you respond to that?" He said, "I wish you could talk to my little baby girl. She can't form sentences like that." I'm like, first of all, he doesn't deny it. Secondly, he offers evidence that you will never do. You will never be able to talk to his little girl. So that's out of the question too. But the fact that he says that is so telling for anybody who is a child protective worker or early childhood education or anybody in education. 30 months old? Okay, Joan, my mother has a record of me speaking, not a record, a recording, but speaking in full sentences at 9 months. By 22 months old, my aunt and uncle were visiting from Michigan from California and recalling a vacation that we all went on in 1961. I was 22 months old, and they were saying, "You were so loquacious. You were participating in adult conversation, making observations, expressing opinions. You were remarkable." Okay, so I might have been a little bit faster developed language, but by 30 months, he's saying that a little girl can't say, "Mommy, kill daddy." That's too complex. If that's true, that indicates a couple things. She's probably autistic, but if she hasn't been diagnosed with autism, the second most likely thing is what? You guessed it, abuse. Abuse. And if his experience with her is that she doesn't talk probably at all, it's because she doesn't open her mouth around him, period. Because what happens? You get hit. And that is so telling. That guy should be in jail. He should be in jail. And I'm sorry, I don't need much trial for that. The daughter is evidence right there. The daughter, he doesn't deny it. He doesn't say, "Oh, that's ridiculous." He just says, she couldn't possibly express that. She can't even talk, is what he's saying. At 2.5 months old, or 2.5 years old, children are very well on their way to speaking quite, exactly, loquaciously. They really talk. And if he doesn't think a word sentence is too much for her, that that girl's in real trouble, and she should be removed from that home.
Yeah, it's really, really scary. I guess the one good piece of this is because now there's so much scrutiny, he wouldn't dare do anything to that little girl. He wouldn't dare, because that would be the blow that sends him not only out of Congress but also into jail.
Yeah, well, he's done enough. If he's broken her collarbone with a blow, that's more than enough to traumatize that little girl for her entire life.
Yeah, I agree. It's just awful. Paul, thank you so much for the call. We are coming up on news. We are going to be back with much more right after the news.
Remember when you get to work to hop over to WCPT820.com or the TuneIn Radio app and stream The Stephanie Miller Show. Weekdays 8 to 11 a.m. on Chicago's Progressive Talk, where facts matter. You're listening to WCPT 820 because facts matter.
It's time for Joan Esposito. Live, local, and progressive.
Joan, as always, exceptional work from you from, your TV days all the way up to today. You're truly exceptional, and thanks for this great show you have.
It's time for Joan Esposito on WCPT 820, Chicago's Progressive Talk.
It's been too long since we chatted with Lisa Graves. She is an expert on the courts, and she's also been doing a deep dive into the right wing and the way it is structured these days. You can find her on Substack. It is called Grave Injustice at The Lisa Graves. Lisa, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Joan. It's always wonderful to be on your show. Thanks for inviting me back.
Okay, so how do we impeach at least John Roberts, and then we'll go on to Clarence Thomas, and then we'll go on to Alito? Has a justice ever been impeached and removed?
Well, in fact, when you look at the historical record on impeachments, people who've been impeached by Congress, meaning the bill of impeachment has passed, and then the conviction of impeachments in the Senate, it's actually judicial officers, judges, who have been the most frequent entity or type of person who's been impeached. So even though in recent years the focus has been on presidential impeachment, the two impeachments of Donald Trump by the House, which unfortunately did not get a supermajority in the Senate for conviction, historically it's been judges who've been impeached. There was one very famous trial of a Supreme Court justice. But from my perspective, when you look at the record of what's happening with this Roberts Court, I think, and I certainly support bills of impeachment for a number of the Supreme Court justices because of what they've done, their actions in terms of the corruption issues, as well as the way in which they have tried to commandeer the court to aid a very partisan, hyper-partisan political agenda. And I would say in that regard, it's not just a difference of opinion in terms of the Voting Rights Act. John Roberts has sought out to destroy the Voting Rights Act and its key protections, and he has wielded the judicial power in a way that I think is illegitimate, and done so.
I've read about John Roberts and the things that you just referenced, and there was, I forget what article I was reading, but they were speculating that John Roberts has this sort of white Christian nationalist idea that he's never really been real public with, but that clearly seems to be the agenda that he is pursuing quite rabidly. Do you think that's correct reporting?
Well, I never know what's in a particular person's heart. I know what they do. And what I know with John Roberts is that he chose to clerk for one of the most racist members of the Supreme Court. That's Bill Rehnquist, who tried to get the justice Rehnquist clerked for, to dissent in Brown versus Board of Education. We know that the man that John Roberts clerked for was active in trying to suppress the vote in Arizona, taking cameras to Black neighborhoods to try to intimidate Black voters in that city before he was ultimately nominated to the Supreme Court. And we know that John Roberts got his first big job at the Justice Department because Bill Rehnquist called Ken Starr to get him a job at the top of the Justice Department, where John Roberts was given the job of managing the response to the Voting Rights Act reauthorization, where Congress was trying to fix a decision that Bill Rehnquist joined that limited the ability of courts to look at the effects of changes in maps and voting on Black voters. And that's the job John Roberts got. He had no experience in voting rights, no experience in those types of cases. His experience was staging with or being mentored by Bill Rehnquist. And he spent hundreds of hours trying to defeat those amendments to the Voting Rights Act. He lost. He knows with every fiber of his being that he lost that fight over Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. And yet here he is in the year 2025 going along with a decision, basically empowering a decision to destroy Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, to bar the courts from really considering the effects of this gerrymandering, the effect of diluting the Black vote. And so when I think about John Roberts, who was raised in a sort of lily white, 100% white Indiana beach town, who really comes from these elite corridors, what I think about is not what he may or may not think in his heart about Black Americans. What I see is what he's done, which is that he has put up impediments to make it harder for Black Americans to get representation, make it harder for their votes to count.
Lisa, I don't mean to sound naive, but I'm about to sound naive. Why would it be so bad? And I know John Roberts isn't the only one. You know, they like you say, they've all but killed the Voting Rights Act. Why is it so threatening to give Black people, poor people, rural people, people that don't look like you, people that didn't grow up like you? Why is it so threatening to get them to vote?
Well, you know, it's not a naive question. In some ways, it's just shocking that here we are in the year 2026 with a Supreme Court that has put its thumb on the scale of justice and the election in a way that they know for certain is going to bleach out the Black caucus in a number of these southern states and make it harder for people to get representation. When I mentioned that case about Bill Rehnquist targeting these Black neighborhoods in Arizona with this Operation Eagle Eye, where they were taking cameras to photograph people at a time in which Black Americans were facing the threat of being lynched for voting, at a time in which there was, tremendous unrest in the country because of how Black Americans were being treated, seeking equality. That the argument that Bill Rehnquist ultimately made was he wasn't targeting Black voters, he was targeting Democrats who just happened to be Black. And now we've heard that argument reprised by this Supreme Court. John Roberts handed the pen to Sam Alito in a decision a couple of years ago, coming out of South Carolina, the Alexander case, where the lower courts found that what was happening in South Carolina was a racial gerrymander. The white majority legislature in South Carolina had moved 20,000 Black voters out of their district in order to preserve or secure a white vote, the white vote for Nancy Mace. They did it with precision. The lower courts found there to be racial discrimination, this to be racial gerrymandering under the Voting Rights Act in violation of it. But what John Roberts and Sam Alito said was, no, as long as you claim you're doing it for partisan reasons, it's okay. And they expanded on that in this Calais decision in a situation where after the 2020 census, Louisiana was shown to have even more Black Americans living in Louisiana, nearly a third of the state. But the white legislature created only one Black majority district and 5 white majority districts for Congress in that state. That was struck down by a lower federal court. And then the new map that would have created 2 Black majority districts with 4 white majority districts was then struck down by this Roberts court, again, claiming that the white legislature could do what it wanted as long as it was claiming that it was doing it for partisan reasons, and in essence didn't say the N-word. And so, what they're afraid of is representation, people getting their voices heard in Congress. And, back to that decision that Bill Rehnquist was part of, that John Roberts tried to stop from being overturned, that was a case out of Mobile, Alabama. And what had happened in that case was that the Mobile city had tried to change the voting rules so that basically only whites would get elected to the city government there. What the effect was, and it was documented in that court case, was that Black residents, had worse roads, had worse trash pickup, had, worse plumbing, to their houses. Like, the effect was the whites were getting the benefits of government and the Black citizens of Mobile, Alabama were getting the short end of the stick because they didn't have representation. And so representation means that you at least have a chance of having your needs met, of having the needs of your neighborhood and your community met because you have someone representing you. And so unfortunately, some of these white legislatures, and we saw it in Alabama, Louisiana, Tennessee, they don't want to have Black cities represented. They don't want Black communities to have representation. They want to have white dominance of these legislatures under the guise that it's just Republican dominance. It's really shocking that here we are today on the anniversary of the passage of the Voting Rights Act in the summer of 1965, after so much blood and sweat and sacrifice by Americans across racial lines, across religious lines, across economic lines, coming together to say that equal protection of the law applies to all of us, that it's the promise of the Civil War that we have a right to vote and have our votes be counted. And yet here, because of this Roberts Court, because of John Roberts in particular and his anti-voting rights agenda, we are seeing this anniversary at a time in which those key protections against that kind of gerrymandering, against that kind of dilution of representation or of the Black vote are now dominant and on the rise in service of a Republican Party that, even though it has some racial diversity in some of its representation, very small, relatively speaking, it, for the most part, has pursued policies that hurt poor people, that make it harder for ordinary people to make ends meet, while they have favored billionaires, and I will say white male billionaires, over and over again, and their extreme agenda to expand their wealth at our expense.
Yeah. And I want you to know Lisa Graves knows what she's talking about because she wrote a book, Without Precedent, which was largely about John Roberts. We are going to take a break. We're going to be back with Lisa Graves and more right after this.
Alexa, play WCPT.
WCPT from TuneIn.
Now back to Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
With me is Lisa Graves. You can find her on Substack at the Lisa Graves. She also does some stuff for Midas Touch, Legal AF, whatever that means, Lisa.
And friends.
Oh, and friends. Okay, I like that. There has been some speculation, and I think you might have even done an interview with somebody about this. You know, Donald Trump basically wants all of his executive orders to have the force of law. So he's written this executive order that is going to either cripple or completely do away with mail-in balloting. And he wants to just rush it right up to the Supreme Court. It seems like birthright citizenship, that this is the kind of thing that really, you know, you if you want to change the way we do our elections, first of all, why don't you go to the states, because they run elections, and you know, you can't just write an executive order and change everything. But he's learned that at least a large percentage of the time, the Supreme Court will go along with him. What do you think is going to happen with this?
Well, I really appreciate you raising that point. You know, that birthright citizenship decision should have been laughed out of court in terms of.
It should have been Trump's 9-0. That's what every expert I talked to said. This should be 9-0. It's a no-brainer.
Yeah, it's just so plainly his claim is just so plainly out of bounds, and it wasn't part of John Roberts' agenda. It's really like, what is John Roberts' agenda? So this question of mail-in voting, it's really important because so many people do rely on mail-in voting. In some states, I think like Oregon, it's almost entirely how people vote. It's in fact, mail-in voting by mail has been with us since the Civil War, when Union soldiers were voting by mail and having their mail sent by horseback to count in that 1964 presidential election. So this is not a new phenomenon. It's just a new vector of attack by Donald Trump. And what he did in that executive order, which I don't think is worth the paper that it's printed on, was claim that the U.S. Postal Service could basically determine who gets to receive a ballot from a state or county, and whose ballots they're going to return to a state or county. This is an absolutely outrageous effort to usurp the power over our elections that the Constitution unambiguously gives to the states. It says by its express terms in our Constitution that the states will set the time, place, and manner of elections, not the federal government, not the president, certainly not through some regulation or executive order issued by Donald Trump. So, if things were normal, this would be a case where the Supreme Court would immediately kick that back and reject Trump's efforts to take over our elections. But because this Roberts Court has behaved in such a partisan way, we don't know what it's going to do. However, there is a bit of a silver lining, at least in terms of the prospects here, because earlier this year, the Supreme Court, in a decision in the Watson case, where the Republican Party of Mississippi tried to block the counting of ballots that were postmarked by Election Day. If they didn't arrive by Election Day, the Supreme Court said that those ballots should still count. And so earlier this year, the court, in essence, did affirm the nature of mail-in voting and did affirm that the ballots have to be counted. This is important because I don't know about you, Joan, but every time I now try to send a birthday card, it takes twice as long after Louis DeJoy got done so-called reorganizing the Postal Service and creating these regional centers in the hopes that they could be sold off to XPO or FedEx. Our mail is not being postmarked at our local post office. It's going to these regional centers and taking twice as long to get to their destination. And so when the American people vote by mail, like, they don't have control over when that mail arrives. As long as it's postmarked by Election Day, it should count. So I will say I'm hopeful that this Roberts Court, despite how it has intervened in the map making to aid the Republican Party and to basically resegregate the legislatures of the South, that they won't go along with Trump's effort to commandeer this 2026 election by deploying the Postal Service to do something it's not qualified to do and should have no power to do, which is determine who gets mail. It's ridiculous. So I'm hoping that case will be basically laughed out of court, but we'll see. Just this week, nearly 24 states and the District of Columbia, Democratic-led states, have filed objections to Trump's efforts to take over the elections through this so-called vote by mail rule. And hopefully the court will side with them. And of course, as everyone knows, Donald Trump follows a policy of the law applies to everyone else but him, or his family or his businesses in some ways. He has voted by mail repeatedly, but he doesn't want everyone else to be able to vote by mail, even though it has proven to be a very effective way of people having the chance to cast their vote.
Okay, a couple of questions. I've seen speculation, maybe it was wishful thinking, that somebody like Alito might resign or retire before the midterms, just in case the Democrats take over the Senate, because they want Trump to be able to put another MAGA Young Federalist Heritage Society lawyer on the Supreme Court. My observation is that anybody on the Supreme Court has an ego bigger than all outdoors. And I find it hard to believe that they would throw themselves on their sword for the greater good. But I don't know. I suppose if there's enough behind the scenes pressure, something like that could happen. Do you think it will happen?
Well, there has been a lot of speculation about Alito retiring. He said that he's not. But he could at any time. That's no promise. That's not enforceable. He could decide at any time. He could decide post-election in a lame duck Congress, a lame duck Senate to do it. The history for Supreme Court nominations is they've gone blazingly fast, far too fast, I would say recklessly fast. And
Amy Coney Barrett get confirmed in like 8 weeks?
Yeah, it was less than that. Yeah, it was from September to before, mid-September to right before the election. So it can happen in 30 days if they try to do it. In terms of Alito, I could see him thinking of himself as like sort of the married American Pope and representing the interests, in that way in some nonprofit entity or educational entity to sort of sweeten the deal. I could see that be the next phase of his career as a sort of, really rhetorically aggressive attacker of, progress and things. But it is a lot of power to give up, even to extend the reign of the far right on the court. And so, I'm not sure it's going to happen this year. I do fear that if it did happen, Trump would not just choose someone ideological to the right who is unsuited to, deciding fairly, basically chosen so they won't decide fairly. I fear that Donald Trump would try to put another one of his criminal defense attorneys on the court because that's who you trust.
Oh my God. Yeah. You mean we could see Todd Blanche being nominated for the Supreme Court? I can't even believe
Alina Habba. Yeah, there's a whole cast of these.
Oh God, not her.
Yeah,
please.
So that, I do worry that this Blanche vote is not just about the Attorney General position, but basically getting the Republicans to bend to his will to confirm a former criminal justice lawyer for him, a criminal lawyer, actually also a civil lawyer. Quite frankly, I wrote a piece on my Substack, Grave Injustice, about how Todd Blanche spent 6,600 hours aiding Donald Trump, keeping him out of jail, working as his criminal and civil defense attorney in the year and a half before he was put on the Justice Department as the deputy. So I think Donald Trump would very much like to have to use Todd Blanche's confirmation, if he is confirmed. I'm still hopeful he won't be, as a springboard to taking away that objection to having someone like Todd Blanche put on the U.S. Supreme Court.
You know, I understand. We're in incredibly partisan times. I understand that a lot of Republicans in elected office fear that any single move, hint of disagreement with Donald Trump, let alone a vote against something he wants or someone he wants, they're terrified of that. But, you know, and for the most part, even back in the day when we look back on those, what we think of as halcyon times, there were really usually only one or two elected officials in both parties who you could count on to just vote their conscience and not their party. But we don't even seem to have one or two anymore. We really don't. I mean, you know, Tom Tillis and John Cornyn literally were given a meaningless piece of paper that Todd Blanche signed. And they're like, oh, well, you know what? He did what we said. And, you know, I told him to meet with the survivors, and he did that. Of course, the survivors said that he was a condescending POS. But he ticked a box. He did everything I told him to. And, you know, you would think these guys have nothing to lose. They don't need to get lobbying jobs because they're both rich. Their careers in politics are over. If you're not going to stand up for something when you have nothing to lose, you can't really blame people who have something to lose for not standing up.
Well, it really is shocking. It could have been such a moment of redemption for both Tom Tillis and John Cornyn to stand up against this totally inappropriate move to install Todd Blanche as the Attorney General, and yet they caved. And as you point out, they had no reason to cave. They're plenty rich. How much more money do they need? You know, from a post-Senate career, and at their age, like they have plenty of money from themselves and their families. So why cave? You know, why do they feel so compelled to do what Donald Trump wants? John Cornyn gave one of the most pathetic statements after the fact, which was they just could not rein in the president. Actually,
I heard that.
They could have voted no.
You know,
they could have
can't
voted
rein
no.
him in. Oh no, John, that's your job. You can do it. You can do it.
Yes, exactly.
That was one when I saw that one. You know, I try not to yell at the television. I really do. But man, when that one came, I'm afraid I had an outburst.
Well, I was going to say, Joan, I mostly try to read this stuff because it's really hard to watch it in real time and with the audio and the video of it. So I read it. I still do curse. But it you know, they have power. This is what the framers, this is what the Constitution was intended to do, was to give the Senate the power to say no to someone unsuited for position who's used the job of acting Attorney General and Deputy Attorney General already to act as though his job is to serve Donald Trump, not the American people, to cut this deal, this collusive deal, as the lower federal court found just 2 weeks ago, where there was not an adverse proceeding between Todd Blanche and the Justice Department and Donald Trump. They cut him a sweetheart deal to get him off the hook for any investigations, at least retroactively. Certainly, it looked even broader than that at the outset. But this is for a president whose financial documents, his taxes, been under audit for years. We don't know whether he's paid his taxes or not. We don't know if he paid taxes on the money last year, the $2 billion that he took in as president, his enrichment in this first year of his presidency. And it comes at a time when Capital One, what's in your wallet bank, has debanked him because there were so many transactions going through his 300 plus corporate entities that it triggered the money laundering screen and the expert analysis of their bank, that they could not risk continuing to have him as a bank customer. And yet Todd Blanche cut that deal to try to basically give Donald Trump a windfall and his sons and his companies from any investigation of any activity, at least through May of this year, for years before now. That is just a dirty deal. And that's on top of the dirty deal of trying to pay off the people who were convicted, pled guilty or were convicted by juries of attacking our Capitol Police on January 6th to do Donald Trump's bidding. And so it is an abomination for, and that's on top of, the pursuit of James Comey for a picture of seashells, the pursuit of Donald Trump's political
my God,
enemies.
I know.
Yeah, it's an outrage that Donald Trump nominated him. It's an outrage that he was even given a hearing. His nomination should have been dead on arrival at the Senate Judiciary Committee. It's an abomination that he has been moved out of committee and that he could have a floor vote in the next 24 to 48 hours. It will be a travesty of justice, literally, for Todd Blanche to be confirmed to helm the Justice Department officially. And we're going to have to work really hard to have a Congress that will hold Donald Trump accountable, because this Justice Department certainly won't.
Lisa, thank you so much for being here. Lisa Graves, she knows everything there is to know, bar nothing, about the court system and the people who are a part of it. Thanks so much, Lisa. This is great.
Thanks, Joan. Thank you so much for having me on. I'll come back anytime.
Thank you. We're going to take you up on that. We're going to take a break. We'll be back with more after this.
This is Chicago's Progressive Talk, 820 AM, WCPT Willow Springs, and online at WCPT820.com, where facts matter.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
I am joined by political science professor William Muck from North Central College. Before I talk to somebody that especially I'm going to talk to for a while, we usually exchange articles or emails about, what are the interesting things to talk about today. And Professor Muck did that very, very graciously. And I responded that I thought these were great ideas because the only thing I can think about is donuts. And I have been talking about donuts since the beginning of the show. And I'm still talking about donuts. So, you're kind of on your own here.
I laughed out loud when I saw that, Joan. That was just fantastic. Love it.
Okay, well, I will try to focus on some things that are perhaps a little bit more relevant. I was reading something in, I think it was in The Guardian. They had an article about where we are with Iran, because, I have to check in because when you wake up every morning, the situation with Iran is different. And there was an article said Iran and Oman are close to an agreement about the Strait of Hormuz. And I was like, wait a minute. Weren't we supposed to be in those talks? And weren't we supposed to be negotiating some kind of a deal here? You mean the two of them on either side of the strait, they're negotiating themselves? And then I thought, well, maybe they're more likely to get something done if Donald Trump isn't a part of the process. Donald Trump, and maybe also Iran has figured out Donald Trump doesn't know how to get out of this mess. He doesn't have any advisors that have the intelligence or the experience to show him a path out of this mess that he should never, ever have gotten into. And so maybe they just figure, well, Iran and Oman will negotiate, will come up with an agreement, will announce it. And then maybe Donald Trump will just say, hey, look at that. I won. It's over. Going forward. What do you think about all this mess?
I think you're spot on in the sense that, I'm sure Iran and Oman are looking at this saying, if we get Donald Trump more directly involved in this particular conversation, he's going to want to own it. It's going to be all about him, and then we won't get to the finish line. And really what it sounds like this conversation is about is if they open the Strait of Hormuz, Oman and Iran are sort of working out agreement, ships going in one direction will go past Iran, and then the ships that are going out will go along the Omanian Strait, right? So they're basically trying to figure out a pathway in and out, which in some ways is sort of a simple thing to do. But if you sprinkle in a little Donald Trump, it becomes much, much more complicated. Now, but I think you're absolutely right that whatever comes from this, if it is successful, Donald Trump will try to take credit for it. He's been doing so the last couple days, arguing that, we've been talking to Iran and Iran's going, we're having no conversations at all. So I hope that some sort of agreement is worked out where they open the Strait of Hormuz, because that gets us back to the starting line where we can now begin to have some conversation about Iran's nuclear program and ending this conflict. So hopefully other actors can maybe get us a little bit closer to a solution.
Well, we certainly can't. And, I read that Maggie Haberman and Jonathan Snow had a meeting in the Oval Office with Donald Trump before they published their book. They wanted to run some things by him. They wanted to talk to him. And Maggie Haberman said in an interview, the Iran war was full-throated at that point. There's so many things going on in the country. She said when we walked in, all across the Resolute desk were pictures of trees, photographs of trees, and he held them up to them and said, I love trees. Trees are really important. I like to plant trees. We have somebody who is unfit in the Oval Office, and we have a legislative branch. I'm beginning to think that even if he wanted to drop a nuclear weapon, they wouldn't stand up to him. I mean, we have Todd Blanche, the most corrupt lawyer I have ever seen in public life. He's being pursued in the state of Florida for perpetrating a fraud on the court, basically lying to the court and trying to lead the court astray, which is an offense that is just so serious, it's almost never invoked. And we're going to put him in charge of the legal system. There's nobody in Trump's orbit that has the experience or the intelligence to give him good advice. Absolutely, absolutely not. So I really feel that if we don't, that's why I think even if there are men with machine guns at the polling places, I'm voting. Right. I'm getting out there, I'm voting. Because otherwise, I don't know what will happen to the whole world. Especially, I don't know what will happen to the United States.
You think about, the interviews, the most recent interview, they talked about that in that conversation with Donald Trump. I think Haberman said something like 70% of his mind is focused on monuments and trees and, making more things into gold. And he's really thinking about what he's doing to Washington, D.C. And he's relatively indifferent to war and peace and the conflict in Iran, all of these issues. And the most important decision a president makes is that decision to go to war. And so you want him hyper focused on all of that, but he's not. And then to your second point, he has surrounded himself with loyalists who aren't going to say, hey, Mr. President, we should really refocus less on the arch and more on what's going on in Iran. They're not willing to do that. Even Hegseth, as you were noting earlier in the show, all he's trying to do is save his own butt. Nobody is really having the hard conversations. I find myself thinking about these regimes, whether it was some sort of, monarchical regime or Stalin's regime, where nobody was willing to push back against the great leader because they were worried about their own future. And I think we have something like that, where nobody is willing to have the hard conversation with the president to say, hey, we really need to think about how we get ourselves out of this conflict. We need to think about, both the economic implications of it, the security implications. None of that is happening. And this isn't just, a board game. This is the world. This is American security. All of these things matter.
I played a sound clip at the beginning of the show from Michael Wolff, and he was talking about Trump's relationship with Max Miller. But he said that you can understand the things that Trump does and says if you understand that he doesn't want anybody to tell him what to do. So if other Republicans came and said, you really need to get Max Miller to resign, he doesn't want, if you try to tell him what to do, he will dig in his heels or even sometimes do the opposite. And nobody knows more than him. He is the only one who knows everything. That is not a recipe for diplomacy or political success.
Right. I think instead of talking historians and political scientists, you should bring the psychologists in, right? Because this is sort of where we're at, trying to diagnose what's going on in his head. And again, when you were talking, it just made me think back to Stalin. I spent a lot of my earlier career sort of studying the Cold War and Stalin and the inability to bring truth to him, to always being worried about how the great man would respond to evidence brought to him. And that's where we're at right now. It doesn't matter what's going on in the world. It matters, how does Donald Trump react to it? And what a terrible way to make decisions. I mean, it's sort of shocking the place that we find ourselves. I thought Trump 1.0 was bad. I don't think we could have envisioned at that time how disastrous and how dangerous and how irresponsible the governance would be in this second Trump term. We all were worried, Joan, but this has been far, far worse.
Yeah, it certainly has. I'm speaking to political science professor William Muck. We are going to take a break and continue our talk right after this.
Chicago's Progressive Talk, WCPT 820, where facts matter.
Oh, hey, it's Joan Esposito, and I want to tell you about 120 Life. 120 Life is a drink made with ingredients that help support healthy blood pressure. My mom was on blood pressure meds her entire adult life, and for many people, it runs in the family. 120 Life is a great tasting fruit and vegetable drink designed to improve your blood pressure. Put it to the test for a couple of weeks. Check your blood pressure. See if it works for you. Some people reported results in as little as 2 weeks. And 120 Life is also good to drink because it is a fruit drink. It is healthy, and it's not super sugary. To try it, go online to 120life.com. That's 120life.com. If your high blood pressure doesn't come down in 2 weeks, you can get a full refund. And you can get a 20% discount on your order. Use the code JOAN, Joan, for 20% off your order. These statements have not been approved by the Food and Drug Administration. This product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease.
Now back to Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
North Central College political science professor William Muck and I have been talking about the Iran war. And, I've been reading more and more about cyber attacks. The first one was on a water system in Minnesota. Then I was reading follow-up reporting that said that there was at least one, if not three other states where they felt that cyber hackers had been trying to get into the control mechanisms for the water systems. There was also a number of other areas of our lives where it was believed that we are going to be vulnerable to these cyber attackers. And despite Donald Trump saying, because he doesn't like Tim Walz, oh no, Minnesota, they just did it themselves. There are no hacks from Iran. We just hate Minnesota and they're idiots. But the reporting has been not only are we seeing water systems targeted and potentially targeted, we are now looking at all these other areas of our lives where we may be vulnerable. The power grid, other areas. And it was always postulated from the very first days of this conflict. We knew Iran didn't have the ability, to cross the ocean and attack us directly. But they don't have to do that anymore. This is a modern day. You can get a bunch of hackers in a room and you can bring somebody to their knees. I don't know. I wonder if Iran and Oman do strike a deal. Do you think Iran will back off on these cyber attacks?
A lot of it will depend on whether the conflict, the fighting, the war continues, because I think you're really right here to say that Iran is thinking about how do they fight back against the United States. And what we're seeing is a preview of what conflict is going to look like in the 21st century, right? This is sort of the future of conflict. We're still going to have conventional battles and planes and tanks and all that kind of stuff, but increasingly we're going to see conflict play out that is cyber, on sort of the quiet underbelly of interactions that come along with globalization. And the tactic is so effective for states like Iran or North Korea, Russia, China, because you don't have to be as powerful as the United States. And that's why Iran looks at this and says, hey, if the United States is going to continue to bomb us, if they're going to target our infrastructure, blow up power plants, blow up water desalination plants, there's a way that we can have a similar type attack on them. Now, whether they go through with that or not, I don't know. But even if they don't, the psychological impact that we're all having right now, realizing that Iran may be in our power grid, that Iran maybe they've already hacked into some of our water supply. So that is a tremendous psychological threat. And it's a way to address the sort of the asymmetry between, the United States, which is this big power, and Iran, which can't meet it conventionally. But if it moves towards cyber attacks, it can level the playing field. So it's both sort of fascinating, but also terrifying what we're seeing play out here.
It absolutely is. And I seem to recall that Donald Trump firing the guy who was head of cyber crimes because he had the audacity to say that the 2020 election was free and fair. Oh, no, I'm sorry. You cannot. And this is the real danger, aside from everything else we've talked about with Donald Trump. Anybody with any kind of expertise who disagrees with Donald Trump gets fired. And so when you actually need expertise, I saw articles that said, well, you know what, water systems across the country, they should make sure their computers aren't connected to the internet. Okay, well, yeah, there's a high-tech solution to prevent hackers to air-gap all of your computers, and then it kind of also makes you wonder why they weren't air-gapped in the first place. But, we don't have, that's why I think Pete Hegseth threw his number 2 under the bus when Trump was mad about us running out of munitions. Jeanine Pirro threw Doug Burgum under the bus when she dropped all the vandalism cases for the reflecting pool because the evidence wasn't there. Nobody looks at him and says to Donald Trump, you were wrong on this, or you need to go in this direction, not that direction. I don't see how this turns out anyway other than disastrously.
Right, because you need, talking about expertise, you need people at the federal level, and Trump has sort of cleared that out already. And so you need people that are thinking about sort of at the national level, but you also need expertise and attention at the local level, right? And that's where it appears that Iran was really focusing, is at the local communities, because they're more vulnerable, right? They don't have the resources, the expertise, the time, the money to sort of think about all of these channels and their challenges. And that's why you also need the federal government supporting, engaging, developing a sort of symbiotic relationship between all of these, because democracies, advanced economies are much more vulnerable than, say, like North Korea, right? If you want to hack into North Korea and shut down the internet, okay, doesn't have the same impact if you target the United States, where so much of our lives are online, connected economically, politically, so all of this stuff. So democracies are particularly vulnerable. So this is where you need to devote resources, attention, expertise, and Donald Trump isn't interested in any of that. He isn't interested in governing. He's interested in the optics and looking tough and all of that, but that doesn't defend against Iran cyber attacks.
There was something, I saw a clip from Lawrence O'Donnell, since I don't really stay up that late anymore, but and he said, this was from his show, he said that the Department of Justice sent teams of either a team of 2 or a team of 3 people to Michigan, and they went to polling places. He said that they were in plain clothes. They didn't identify themselves, but they observed. They went into the polling places. They watched what was happening and how it was happening. And his question was, have we just seen something that is going to lead to some kind of election disruption, especially in swing states when it comes to the midterms? Why on earth would DOJ teams be sent to Michigan on Election Day to walk around and visit polling places? We're just going to, you don't know who we are or where we're from. We're just going to walk around and kind of watch things for a while, and then we're going to leave, and it's going to be really creepy. I can't think to myself, what that would be laying the groundwork for. Have you ever heard of anything like that?
Well, not unless, like you said, they're trying to prepare or lay the ground for a future activity after the election, right? Because normally the kind of work that happens is the federal government helping states out. Oh, we want, let's think more about cybersecurity, or let's think more about resources. The federal government is really important to helping states carry out these elections. You send in the DOJ because you're thinking about long-term undermining that democratic process. You're thinking about targeting officials. You're thinking about arresting people who you think are stealing an election. You're thinking about rolling in the federal troops, right, to capture voting machines and all of that, but you have to have the legal justification to do so. So my sense of what's going on here is they're trying to find space and loopholes where they can create the legal argument to engage in this unjust behavior, right? That's the only reason you might be doing this, or the top reason I can think of, is that they are terrified about the midterm election. They are terrified about urban areas, Black and brown communities voting, and they are thinking, how do we get in there and tweak the vote, undermine the process, make it more difficult, intimidate, all of those things. And again, it should just terrify us, because this is not how you run a democracy.
You've seen the news stories. Do you believe there is any chance that we have a normal, interference-free, ICE-free, National Guard-free midterm election in this country?
It's hard. So the political scientist me says, looks at the evidence and says they're going to try something, right? The hopeful citizen inside me says, we've done it in the past, and I will say the states do a really good job. The United States historically has had some of the most safe and secure elections in the world. The states do a really, really good job, and the fact that we devolve so much of that responsibility to the state level means it's really difficult for the federal government to intervene and steal an election. But I look at Georgia right now, where, whether it's election boards or the process or voter rolls, the federal government is putting their thumbs on the scale and putting people in positions of power where if Trump does want to execute some sort of undermining the democratic process, he will have people in place. And that's what terrifies me, because, going back in history, Georgia, which is run by Republicans, has still had free and fair elections. But they've removed a lot of those people and put in loyalists there. So that's the real question for me. When push comes to shove and there are these challenges, do these loyalists who are election deniers, do they still allow the process to play out? And I will say I'm worried about that. I'm really, really worried. Now, I will say the Democratic Party is attuned to this threat, and they are getting legal people on the ground. So it is going to be, I think there's going to be lawyers everywhere. But I'm really worried, because I can't think of another election where there was the potential, like where, somebody in power was threatening to undermine the democratic process. Again, just unprecedented is overused, but I feel like we're in that sort of space now.
I want to play something for you. I know one of the things that we decided to talk about was the Democratic Party as it is now, moderates versus socialists, and all of the hysteria surrounding that. We actually have a sound clip of the Democratic Senate nominee from Michigan, Abdul El Sayed, and he was on Chris Hayes' show. Jacob Sabaroff was a fill-in host, and he talked about the Democrats and the disarray. Listen to this.
I was looking at some of the headlines about your victory that have come out, since last night. Democrats' path unclear. Democrats licking wounds. Warning for Democrats. These are mainstream headlines about you and the victory. What's your reaction to this framing about the race?
Well, I understand if you think that the whole point here is about where the Democrats go, you might miss the fact that this is about everyday people in the state of Michigan. My goal is to get money out of politics, put money in your pocket, pass Medicare for all, because when I talk to Michiganders, as I have for the better part of 15 months, in their living rooms, in their basements, in their backyards, in their parks, they don't tell me about where they sit on the left-right spectrum. They're asking me about who's going to show up to make sure that I can afford my groceries, who's going to make sure that I can see a doctor when I get sick, who's going to make sure that the infrastructure that I travel, the roads roads and bridges? Don't pop my tire every time I drive over them. And who's going to make sure my kid's school is competent? Those are the questions people are asking, and they're asking them because Donald Trump and his acolytes like Mike Rogers have done just such a piss poor job at actually doing the thing they got elected to do. They're taking us to what, another war? We've got an opportunity to actually answer their problems. That's what this movement was built on doing, and that's why I think Democrats have a real pathway forward. If you look at the numbers coming out of yesterday, Democrats voted in, what, 500,000 more voters? If we show up like that in November, what's that going to mean for Mike Rogers and, frankly, any of their chances?
Seem to really energize younger voters into turning out and getting excited about political races. What do you think about what he just said?
I think it's really interesting, right? And I will preface all of this by saying I love all of the chaos in the Democratic Party right now. I think it is good. I don't think we should run away from it. I think this is what you want. Donald Trump has blown up the political system, and that, as bad as that has been, it does create an opportunity for real conversation to say what matters, where does the party want to go, what do we want to focus on, and I think this is good. Like, have these conversations. Now, given all of that, I think some of the more progressive or the DSA candidates are better at politics than others. And I think El-Sayed is really, really good at this. He reminds me a lot of Zohran Mamdani, where he's thinking about pragmatic, practical issues. He doesn't sound like Karl Marx when he's talking. He sounds like a guy who wants to solve your problems. He's talking about potholes. He's talking about healthcare. These are issues that if you didn't know, that this was the progressive left or the democratic socialist left, you would think this is a guy who just wants to address problems of the 21st century, right? And I think those candidates are really well positioned to do well. I think others of them may not be as strong, right? I think you have to ground this in a sort of pragmatic problem solving, and where we need to move to solve these problems is this particular space. But I think is very energizing for a lot of young people. And I think it's going to strike a lot of people as a really sound and smart message, right? So I'm really thrilled by all of this conversation.
I'm talking to political science professor William Muck from North Central College. We are going to take a break for news and be back with more after this.
The Thom Hartmann radio program provides all of the intelligence, information, and insight you'll need to win the water cooler wars. Weekdays 11 to 2 right here on WCPT 820, Chicago's Progressive Talk, where facts matter. Because facts matter. You are listening to WCPT 820.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive.
Quite frankly, I get most of my news from you.
Joan Esposito.
Y'all ready for this?
On WCPT 820.
I'm talking with political science professor William Muck from North Central College. Right before we went to the break, we played some sound from Abdul El-Sayed talking about democratic disarray. I can't understand what seems to be panic in some circles. It's like, oh my God, the socialists are coming. They're too radical.
Yep.
But again, what you pointed out, they're exciting viewers or voters, probably viewers too. They're exciting people to join their campaigns. They're exciting people to come out and vote in a primary. Good God, it's bad enough trying to get people out for a midterm, let alone a primary. So there seems to be kind of a old guard, young guard clash here.
Yeah.
Do you think the old guard is going to survive?
Well, the old guard has a lot of the money, right? And I think that's the really interesting thing. And we saw that in Michigan, where a lot of money was put in for the sort of traditional Democratic base, and that didn't work, right? El-Sayed was able to win, but that money still matters, right? And we're going to see that play out. And the New York Times had a piece today kind of talking about this civil war between the Democratic Party. I will say those the more progressive left, they are engaging in conversations that I think a lot of Democratic voters want to hear about. And so then the challenge for the more centrist candidates are, can you engage those issues? And if you can do so, fine. But if you're still talking about issues that aren't connecting with the American public, you're not going to do well in this little political environment. Again, Donald Trump has changed all of this. The old conversations, the old sort of partisan divides are very, very different now. And so there's space for candidates to come in and say, hey, we're going to talk about this. Now, the other thing I will say is that you still got to win elections. And so some of the candidates, I have to be careful, right? So I think a lot about the Francesca Hong up in Wisconsin running for governor. I think I was up in Wisconsin this weekend and I saw some of the attack ads that the Tom Tiffany campaign is running, and they are going after her. They're going after her for, comments on Thanksgiving. They're going after her for the socialist thing. So you got to be prepared to confront that attack, right? And I think some of these candidates are much better at flipping the script and saying, hey, let's think about the real problems. I mean, Mamdani is so good at that. You ask him a tough question, he says, let's really think about the core of that question. Let's not just, play the game. And so I think she's got to be better about that because I think once you get into the general election, it's going to be really, really tough. And it's going to be easy for the right to portray these candidates as more extremist than they really are. So I think, the sort of the ideological position matters, but also how you present yourself in the campaign is going to be a challenge as well.
I saw that writing about Francesca Hong and the attack about how she said something like, we shouldn't have Thanksgiving anymore, or something along those lines. I skimmed the article because I knew that wasn't something I was going to be talking about today. And correct me if I'm wrong, because like I said, I skimmed it. But the sense I came away with was that maybe she was making a joke, like, Thanksgiving when we all get together and families fight and unearth old rivalries. But again, I didn't read it closely. What was the comment about Thanksgiving, and was it something real or something that was misinterpreted?
There was some depth to it. Again, I don't want to pretend to know like her deeper meaning, but she was talking about various communities and how people experience Thanksgiving, that not everybody experiences Thanksgiving in the same way. And as an academic, I say, absolutely, right? This is a really interesting conversation. I'm happy to have that. But I will say, if you come out against Thanksgiving, they're just going to run nonstop ads against you in the state of Wisconsin that are going to be really difficult to overcome. So that's the challenge for the Democratic Socialist type candidates is, can you do what El Sayed did, which is say, let's talk about the issues and don't try to make this into a silliness thing, and what Mamdani has been so good at. You've got to be able to be proactive and confront this because those ads are coming. The other thing I would point about her is like she, her campaign isn't super sophisticated. She's usually just hopping on Zooms on her own without fancy cameras, and stuff like that matters too, right? So you've got to professionalize yourself and be prepared for those critiques because they're coming. The right is very excited about the potential attacks they could go against, level against her. But again, I'm all for all the conversation. I think it's really, really interesting. I just think you got to be able to win elections.
Yeah. Well, that's what everybody said. Mamdani was too radical, but he wasn't trying to be crazy. He was trying to say, what? Maybe if we make the public buses free, it'll help more people, get to work and everything. And it was so down to earth. And all I can think of is James Carville from a million years ago. It's the economy, stupid. 100%. And I think the best of the progressive/socialists get that.
Yeah. I think so, too. And I mean, even thinking about the way Bernie Sanders has connected with blue-collar Americans oftentimes, right? Because he hits on issues that a lot of people who are struggling because of this economy resonate with, whether it's healthcare costs or transportation. I mean, that's the kind of language that Bernie is really, really good with. And I think candidates that echo that and think about, hey, what are the problems that we're facing? How do we think about making government part of the solution for those problems? How do we enable people to overcome some of the inequality in the current economic system? All of those things are going to have real appeal, especially to young people, Joan, right? I mean, I think about on college campuses, a lot of the sort of mainstream Democratic Party isn't connecting, but these candidates are because they're speaking the language that young people want to hear.
There's two more topics that I want to try to get to before we wrap this up. And I don't want to start one and then have to break for a commercial. So, Lady B, let's take this commercial just a hair early, so then we can just go straight through to 4:30 after this.
Because facts matter. You are listening to WCPT 820.
Now back to Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
I told you that political science professor William Muck from North Central College and I, as I do with many of the guests, there's sometimes a back and forth about, what sort of topics we will talk about, unless we get distracted by the news of the day. But one of the things that you suggested really made me stop and think. The politics of being wrong.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I've been thinking a lot. Of course, I spent a lot of time thinking about the Iran war. And one of the things that is just so clear is this was a mistake. It was, it's a terrible idea. It's played out. It's hard to find any good justification for it. It's just wrong. But politicians can never admit being wrong, except for maybe Donald Trump. And I'm thinking about this example. It's really impossible. It's really difficult for politicians to say, I made a mistake. I was wrong. But in this moment, I think maybe for the first time in history, a president could say, you know what? I screwed up. This was a mistake. And I don't know if it would cost Trump politically, right? I think he could do that. And there's part of me that wants him to do that, just to say, you know what? I made a mistake. I screwed up. Let's try to fix it. Because it would set a precedent for so many of the rest of us to say mistakes are okay. It's okay to be wrong in politics. It's how you respond to that. One of the healthiest things a democracy can produce is leaders willing to admit they've made mistakes. But I think our current system rewards exactly the opposite behavior, right? I'm never wrong. I'm always right. And I just keep thinking about this now. What a gift. Donald Trump has destroyed a lot of things, but what if he gave us this gift to say, I was wrong, and it helped us have a conversation about the politics of being wrong. So Joan, I think we should think more about this. I think it would be really healthy for the democracy for politicians to be able to admit they made some mistakes.
There isn't a woman who, with their partner or husband, hasn't thought, wouldn't it be great if he could just say, I made a mistake. I made a mistake. Let's figure it out. Let's move on. I'm sorry. Come on. At the local level, if that's what relationships are, we can't get people to say they made a mistake. And you think the Roy Cohn educated Donald Trump, Roy Cohn, who told him you don't ever, ever admit that you've done anything wrong. And you just, you go after and you go after and you fight. I think that's a wonderful sentiment. And if I called up your wife, do you think she would say, you know what, he's an evolved human being. He very readily admits to when he's made a mistake. I don't have to nag him. I don't have to harass him. What would she say, William Muck?
I think she'd say I'm a work in progress, Joan, right? But I think that's what we want to be, right? We want to be working to get better. And I'm glad you brought this down to the individual level, because you're right. It's no different than our interpersonal relationships where it's so hard to do that, or at work where it's so hard to do that. But here's the thing. When we do so, I think about at work. Joan, at work, I apologize all the time. I say I made mistakes all the time. And it has made my life at work so much easier, because once you apologize, I really screwed that up. People are kind. They're gracious. It leads to real conversations about how do we get better. In our relationships, oftentimes they say the best thing you can do is acknowledge a mistake and have that conversation. But we don't extend that to politics. And to your point, we do the exact opposite. And thinking about the sort of toxic masculinity that is Donald Trump and Roy Cohn and this whole new era of politics where Donald Trump knows he's wrong, right? He knows he's wrong on Iran. He knows that vandals did not cut up the reflecting pool, but he is never going to admit being wrong or making a mistake. And I think it's a real danger to the democracy, and it's creating a culture where future politicians and human beings and citizens in the United States are not going to be willing to make those mistakes. And again, it's been sort of stuck in my brain lately.
But wouldn't they cost themselves voters? I mean, if I'm in elected office and I say, you know what, I supported this and I shouldn't have, I advocated for this and I was wrong, I voted for this law and now it's not working out the way I thought. Don't you think that the fear would be voters would be like, well, you should have known better. You should have known better. This is your job. And if you can't figure this out, maybe we'll find somebody else who doesn't make these kinds of mistakes.
It's an important point, right? And also think about the environment that we operate in, where social media, generally media, all of us, we're looking to pounce on those politicians that make those mistakes, right? So it's not a comfortable, safe space to do so. But I do think we would be better off, right? With Iran, if Donald Trump just said, you know what, this was a mistake, I shouldn't have done this, let's try to find a way to get out as quick as possible and minimize the damage, I think that is a good decision-making process. I think it is likely to lead to a better outcome than him continuing to deny this is a mistake, to continue to talk about this as a great achievement. So I know it is difficult to get from A to B, but I'm glad you're willing to talk about it, because I think it's an important thing to think about, encouraging our politicians to say, hey, if you screwed up, acknowledge that. And along those lines, it's okay to shift your thinking on a topic, right? I think about that all the time, especially in this environment where there's so much change going on. It's okay to rethink things. Let's have real conversations about race and gender and identity. All of those things are good. And it's okay for somebody to say, you know what? My thinking's evolved on this because I've had some important conversations. One of the beautiful things about being in academia is that I'm exposed to really smart people who help shift my thinking on a lot of issues. And I would just love, Joan, if we could start doing that in the political process. And maybe it's not going to happen, but I've got hope.
I think you make a really important point, because in the world you come from, people are always doing research. They're collecting data. And an idea that seems to hold water in 1 year, maybe 3 years later, when there are 2 or 3 more studies, that either that idea was wrong or it didn't have the nuance correct. You work in a field where people have to be flexible enough to say, I used to believe that, but now look at this data. Now I'm thinking this. But I don't think most of us come from worlds like that. Most of us come from worlds where, if you make a mistake, there was something wrong with you. You should have been better,
Right. But, science is sort of premised on this idea that you have to accept sometimes you're wrong, right? Science is sort of a brutal space where if your theory is disproven, you got to accept that and move on. And I think about just at a sort of a really human level, my colleagues in the political science department who study race and gender, and I have benefited so much. My colleague Suzanne Chad, who you've talked to many, many times, right? The way in which she helps me understand issues from a different perspective. I study the international system. I'm not always thinking about race and identity and gender in the way that she is, but I have become a more thoughtful person on those issues from those conversations, and sort of subtly acknowledging, like, hey, I didn't have that evolved position. And I would just love if we had a politician do that. And I do wonder whether they might connect with a lot of their constituents who say, hey, this person's a human being, right? It's probably got to be a woman, Joan, because I don't know if a man is ready to do this in politics. But the women could once again lead the way on this idea of empathy and acknowledging it's important to rethink things.
Well, he did have other issues, but before his campaign completely blew up, we got those kinds of apologies from Graham Plattner. Oh, you had this tattoo. Well, I was in the Marines and I was drunk and I just liked the way it looked, and all these other things that I said or did. And he said, I do not want to be judged by my worst day, especially when I was younger. I'm not that person anymore. And, I think if the bad press hadn't continued, I think that would have been sufficient. I think exactly what you're saying would have been right. People would have said, I get that. I get that you don't want to be judged by the worst day of your life. I know, been there, done that kind of a thing. I think he's a perfect example of what you're talking about and how potentially it could work.
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting case, right? Because he came across in the early stages of that as very authentic. I mean, you can think about somebody who's been in conflict and has PTSD and the way that affects you. You can empathize with them, and there is an authenticity to that we don't see in a lot of our politicians who are so carefully scripted, and everything is thought out. And I think that's not working anymore. We're so tired of that. Hey, I'm all for people admitting when they make mistakes. Again, now the key is you got to try to get better, right? And sometimes if there's so much in the closet, maybe you should think about something other than politics. But again, I think it would be a really good norm.
The last thing that you suggested, which also I really caught my eye and thought was amazing. What will historians say about the 2020s? One of the people I follow on social media is Heather Cox Richardson, and she'll do this where, here's where we are today, and there's a similarity for where we were before, and when these events happened before, this is how history judged it. I think there needs to be more of that. What do you think? What do you think that that history will say about the 2020s?
They're going to say a lot, right? When you think about, I think about some of the previous presidents and how much history is going to be written about them versus what we're going through right now. I mean, whether you love him or hate him, Donald Trump is a consequential president living in a consequential time. So there's going to be a lot written and studied about this particular era, not just the sort of rise of populism and sort of anti-democratic elements within that, but the way in which technology is transforming our own daily lives, how we get information, how we work, and how that connects with the sort of the evolution of democratic norms. I think about, I studied the international system. We are drifting back into a great power competition kind of a world. That is a huge development.
What do you mean
decline
by that?
What's
a great
that?
Power competition world. What do you explain that to me?
Oh, sure. So thinking about coming out of World War II, there was basically this consensus that we're going to live in a rules-based international order. The United States is the head of that. We're going to have free trade. We're going to try to work towards more democracies. We're not going to invade other countries, right? There are some basic rules. We're going to try to have a civil international society. And we don't always follow the rules, but the rules are kind of out there. We all understand how we're supposed to behave. Joan, that's gone. Now it's about power politics. What can the United States do? Do we want to topple Venezuela? Do we want to take over Greenland? China is doing much the same. Russia as it invades Ukraine. So now we're moving back to an era where states are going to rely on power and just doing what they might makes right. That's a dramatic development. I think it's a really dangerous development. But as we write the history down the road, that may be one of the most significant stories, that we drifted away from a world that cared about global justice, that tried to create rules to trade with each other, that was trying to promote democracy. Right? I think we're missing that really big shift. And Donald Trump is probably the biggest enabler of that shift because the United States is the most powerful country and has been one of the leading voices about a rules-based international order. So, I mean, I can go on and on about that, but I think this is going to be, historians are going to write a lot about that as well, that the international system itself is becoming very, very different than it's been for the last 80 years.
But do you think it's possible that 50 years from now, AI is going to be writing all this? You could be out of a job. AI could be doing radio. Let's analyze the last 50 years. Well, here's the theories. Here's what happened. Here is the political background, and let's just mix it all up and spout out some kind of history. All of that could be true, right? I mean, I think about, I'm sort of like many people fascinated by what AI is going to do to us. And I was reading something a few months back talking about, how AI is going to change the human experience. And there was a line that said it's going to change what it means to be a human being. And I kind of had to stop for a second. And I'm like, well, I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. And, it talked about the way in which work is going to shift, how we communicate, all of those things. And we're on the cusp of a really we're probably in this dramatic shift where politics is shifting, all of this stuff, technology, all of it. And it's not surprising that humanity is struggling with it, right? And that we're making some bad choices politically because of all of that change. But I think the historians, the political scientists, all the people that write about this in the future, this is a moment to write about. A lot of those other decades that were interesting, not as significant as what we're going through right now. Yeah, it reminds me of what I read about the Industrial Revolution, about how the whole world changed in so many ways. And I sort of feel like that's sort of what we're on the precipice of here. I just hope that World War III doesn't break out, and I'll deal with AI as it comes down the pike. You know, that's my feeling. I don't have very high standards. It's a very low bar to make me happy.
Yes.
Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for all the times that you fill in as a host here on WCPT. I am so glad you enjoy doing radio, because we enjoy hearing you and we enjoy talking with you, William Muck.
Well, thank you so much, Joan. I really do. It's a love of my life now. I can't get enough radio, so I really appreciate the opportunity.
Okay. Well, you'll be back. Oh, God, you'll be back. We are going to take a break. We're going to be back with Rich Eberwein after this.
This is Chicago's Progressive Talk, 820 AM, WCPT Willow Springs, and online at WCPT820.com, where facts matter.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
It is Thursday, and every Thursday we make Rich Eberwein show up in the studio with Lady B or connect via Zoom so he can tell us about all the stories that are being published over on our website, heartlandsignal.com. They have their own reporters, and they do great work each and every day. So Rich joins us once a week to share with us some of the stories that we might have missed on Heartland Signal. Mr. Eberwein, how are you today?
I'm doing pretty well, Joan. How about yourself?
Little more enthusiasm. Come on, Rich. Pump it up.
Sorry.
Yes, much better. Much better.
We'll get the adrenaline going in a second.
Yeah. You know what? It's the end of the day and it's the end of the week, so I will not be responsible for what comes out of my mouth. So
That's
why
completely
don't...
fair. We're out right on the cusp of the weekend here.
Yeah.
You know?
What have you got for us today?
Yeah. First I just wanted to, discuss the primaries that we had on Tuesday a little bit, specifically the Michigan Senate race, which we've been following pretty closely, obviously, for a while now. And just how I just wanted to highlight how significant of a underdog kind of victory this was for Abdul El-Sayed. How much just subjectively he overcame in this race, being outspent 11-1, I think was the estimate. $30 million in pro-Israel money spent against him. Stevens getting support from the incumbent, Gary Peters. Senate minority leaders, Chuck Schumer was backing her. Governor Gretchen Whitmer endorsed her. Slew of elected officials in Congress and in the Michigan State Legislature. And Abdul El-Sayed was able to overcome all of this. Obviously a very, slim victory, but still just kind of a impressive amount of momentum and support against him. And he was able to win. I think it just says a lot about where the Democratic voter is today. And I think there's a bit of an understatement. There's a divide between Democratic voters and party leadership right now on a variety of issues. And Abdul El-Sayed made a lot of those issues the main talking points of his campaign, universal health care, things like that. Go ahead, Jen.
Rich, I want to find out what you think about this. I had looked at some of those endorsements too. I wonder if Chuck Schumer's endorsement in this might have been a negative.
Oh, for sure.
Really?
I think for a lot of young voters, especially, I would say he's very unpopular.
Yeah, and do you think somebody should have said to him, Chuck, we love you, but maybe don't endorse in this race, and for God's sake, don't come to Michigan to campaign for her. Yeah. I don't know.
I mean, especially on the Israel subject, like that was, that is something that leadership and Chuck Schumer is very far away from on this issue, as it pertains to Democratic voters, right? And that's, one of the main things that Abdul campaigned on, right? So yeah, that endorsement and that party leadership supporting a candidate definitely, I think among young voters specifically, has a lot of baggage attached to it.
And for all of the Chuck Schumers of the world who believe that some of these people with socialist ideas, Medicare for all, that they're unelectable, has he paid attention to the energy they have infused into younger campaign workers and younger voters? I mean, we're seeing now, admittedly, midterms don't get a big turnout compared to presidential elections, and primaries, forget it. They're way down on the food chain. But we saw some pretty decent numbers for these primaries.
Yeah, I think for sure. There's a genuine momentum and a hunger among the Democratic base, or just voters in general, younger voters, whatever, more left-leaning voters, however you want to describe it, for these candidates who are pushing back against, the status quo of the Democratic Party leadership over the last however many years. They want these things like universal health care, money out of politics. They don't want their taxpayer dollars supporting bombing campaigns in the Middle
and they
East.
want subsidized or free child care. That's a huge one. They want to be able to, they're not looking for handouts, but like in New York City, if the buses are free, maybe it's a little bit cheaper to get to work every day. Stuff that really makes your life better.
Yeah, and I think that just resonates with where the voters are right now, and they haven't seen enough from the Democratic leadership, Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries, on those fronts, right? Obviously, right now, there's not a lot that they can do because Republicans control Congress and the White House, but, the policy ideas aren't there either. What would we do if we had power? What would we do if we had both majorities and the ability to pass legislation? There's none of that. None of what, Abdul al-Sayed was campaigning on, right? And that stuff resonates with where the voters are right now.
Yeah. I think it's going to be real interesting to see how these midterms shape up. I think it's going to be a pretty exciting time for Democrats. And I hope that the young people who have been supportive of these candidates show up in force. Man, I hope they do.
And I hope other Democrats do as well, because one of the encouraging things was seeing Mallory McMorrow endorse Abdul al-Sayed immediately afterwards. Great. I think that there's definitely some people in the party who are going to resist Abdul al-Sayed's candidacy and maybe, not even endorse or support him, right? But it would be a real shame to see that happen, especially if, Mike Rogers, this is going to be a tight race no matter what. It was going to be a tight race no matter who the Democratic candidate was going to be. Just the nature of a purple state like Michigan. But, it would be very eye-opening if you see people not even going near this race or endorsing Abdul al-Sayed or supporting him just because of his, left-leaning ideology. Would you rather have Mike Rogers?
Yeah, really. Oh, yeah. What else have you got for us today?
So another Michigan Republican, Bill Huizenga, is a U.S. representative. We wrote about him earlier this week in his basically 15-year record of voting to cut safety net programs like Social Security and Medicare and advocating for diminishing benefits of these programs. During a town hall last year, Huizenga said that young people need to accept, quote, adjustments to these safety net programs. This record dates back to 2011 when he first came in as in the Tea Party wave. Huizenga has 5 times over his career for proposals that would increase the Social Security retirement age to 69. Obviously, reducing benefits for a lot of people. He's also a big believer in passing a balanced budget amendment, which is one of these ways that Republicans advocate for fiscal conservatism, right? Curbing how much money that the federal government spends in a year. And basically what a balanced budget amendment would do is it would prohibit the federal government from spending more than it takes in tax revenue. But the result, as fiscal advocacy groups point out, is that social programs like Social Security wouldn't be able to tap into their trust funds under this type of amendment, and basically would result in a massive cut to benefits for the program of Social Security.
If they want to make Social Security solvent, all they have to do is raise the income cap. You reach a certain level of income and it isn't that high, and you no longer have to pay in. Well, if they would let's raise it to $1 million. If you make up to $1 million a year, until you go over $1 million, you're still paying into Social Security. And guess what? It would be solvent overnight.
Yeah, and there's been proposals to do just that, just sitting in Congress for years, because Bernie Sanders, his name is attached to them, is my theory. But yeah, that's literally what those bills would do, though, is just increase the payroll tax and the solvency. It would solve this issue that's right around the corner in terms of, the 2032.
We'll wait till it's like the last possible second when everybody's panicking, and then maybe we'll pass the legislation. What do you say?
If at all. Yeah. But yeah, so, this long record of doing this, advocating for custody social programs in the name of fiscal conservatism, right? We can't be spending too much, but it's interesting that all of those theories go out the window when, stuff like the military needs to be funded and the Iran war starts. Bill Huizenga has voted to keep the Iran war going for, I think 6 times he voted against the, war powers resolutions, which are costing, at least $37 billion federal government has spent on the Iran war so far, probably a lot more. Trump administration has asked Congress for another $87 billion. It's funny how the fiscal conservatism goes out the window when Donald Trump needs to conduct a war in the Middle East.
We don't have any money. I'm sorry, we don't have any money for food for kids. We don't have any money for poor people to help with their medical bills. We don't have any money for any of the social programs. Oh, but we discovered somewhere $1 billion a day to fight the war in Iran. Isn't that amazing? Huh. Yeah. Where was that $1 billion? We could have used that $1 billion. How did they find it?
It's funny how all of this works. Another thing he wanted to do is turn Medicare into like a private voucher-like program.
They've been trying to do that for years. They want their buddies to be able to get in and make money off of it. It makes me crazy.
Yeah, it's basically the private insurance companies would target healthier retirees in that scenario, and then everybody else would be left with traditional Medicare while their premiums increase. That's like what the result would likely be of doing that. So he's voted about 5 times to do that as well. But yeah, on the Iran war too, that kind of segues into the third story I had, which is about a Republican in Pennsylvania named Ryan McKenzie. During a telephone town hall, a constituent was asking him last month what his stance was on the war, because she was concerned about Social Security being depleted by 2032, the trust fund, and how Congress can justify giving or considering giving the Trump administration another $87 billion for this war. And he just did not answer the question. He gave a cookie cutter generic response. We want a peaceful resolution to this conflict as soon as possible. Another Republican who has voted several times to keep the war going, not curb Donald Trump's power to wield the military without congressional authority, which he's not supposed to be able to do. Congress is supposed to be involved if there is a military conflict for over a month.
Yes, they are, aren't they?
The Republicans who control Congress apparently forgot.
Have completely abdicated that responsibility.
Yes, including Ryan McKenzie, U.S. Representative Ryan McKenzie. and one of those votes came the day after this town hall where this constituent was asking about, how he can justify this when there's issues like Social Security solvency right around the corner. It's something that he also campaigned on, not against endless wars, he called it, right? Foreign wars, and something that he removed from his website as well. All references to wanting to advocate against foreign wars and war in general was all scrubbed from his campaign website. And then coincidentally, a month later, Donald Trump was campaigning with him in Pennsylvania.
Wow. Yep. They are selling their souls. And it's not even that they're selling out their own voters or their own states. They're selling out the country. And I have to believe that a lot of them are smart enough to know it. I really do believe that, Rich. They know it, and they've somehow come up with some kind of excuse that allows them to sleep at night when they really shouldn't be.
Yeah, I mean, they just spin it. It's constantly spinning. We're trying to protect the safety of the United States. There's no evidence that Iran was even close to getting a nuclear weapon. They've been, there's been claims of the opposite for 30 years up at this point, and it hasn't happened. So, it's they constantly just spinning different narratives to whatever gets them elected, right?
That's right.
Ryan McKenzie.
That's the name of the game.
Yeah. He just is in a swing district, right? When it was popular, when he was campaigning in 2024 on, ending endless wars abroad.
Mm-hmm. The Donald Trump trick. Yeah. Tell people what you know they want to hear and govern whatever it takes to keep yourself in power.
That's the name of the game for
it's a bad game. It's Congress. A bad game. We don't like this game.
No, it's disappointing, but
yes, it is. Is there anything else we can talk about to come out on a high note?
A lot of progressives won in Michigan.
There you go. That's what we're hanging on to with both hands.
Yeah.
We might actually bring about some real change, and wouldn't that be jaw-dropping?
Yeah, I mean, in addition to Abdul El-Sayed, Donovan McKinney was another guy who was backed by Bernie Sanders, was able to win over a two-time incumbent, Sri Tanadar, another moderate Democrat. McKinney is a guy who has worked on, democratic socialist type policies in the past, but it's economic populist policies, I would consider it. We talked about last week, Joan, the utility companies having so much power in Michigan and being able to donate to all these candidates, right? He has introduced legislation to curb that and also increase benefits for utility customers when there are blackouts or power outages. So he has a track record of advocating for these economic populist policies, right? So that was an impressive victory that he was able to knock off a two-time moderate Democrat incumbent in Detroit. So that was a fascinating victory and good one for the progressives, I think.
Yes, I think so too. Rich, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to talk with you. I really appreciate it. And I'm sorry if I browbeat you into finding a silver lining every darn week. But it's good for you.
Somebody has to hold me accountable around
It's
here.
Good for you. That's what I say, like taking your vitamins.
Exactly. Yeah, I appreciate it as much as it doesn't seem like.
Okay, fair enough. Thanks, Rich. Thanks for joining us in the studio today.
Yeah, thank you, Joan.
We are going to take a break. We'll be back with much more after this.
Hey, Google, play WCPT.
Streaming Chicago's Progressive Talk from TuneIn.
Hey, are you interested in buying a house? Call Team Hochberg, our trusted local lender. I heard a recorded ad David did earlier today, and he said he had nearly 500 five-star Google reviews. Well, that just shows you that ad is a few months old, because now There are nearly 500 plus 3 more hundred 5-star Google reviews for Team Hochberg. Let me tell you one story. Tom and Jenny had 2 kids. They were living in a 1,000 square foot apartment. They wanted to buy a home. They had a 640 credit score, combined income of about $130,000, limited savings. They called Team Hochberg to get a free consultation. David answered their questions, introduced them to a realtor who found them a perfect home, and then helped them get an FHA mortgage with just 3.5% down. Before calling Team Hochberg, Tom and Jenny were stuck in an apartment they had outgrown. After speaking with David, they got an FHA mortgage and bought their first home with only 3.5% down. If you want to buy a home with credit scores in the 600s, limited funds for a down payment, do what so many of our listeners have done and what I have done. Call Team Hochberg, 855-563-2843, or go online, 56david.com. That number again, 855-563-2843, or on the web, 56david.com. ACM Equal Housing Lender, NMLS 643114.
Now back to Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
Before I tell you who's coming up on all the different shows, I do need to remind you, because this is a fairly new idea, so it's probably not set in stone for you. Tomorrow is the first day of the weekend. That's how it's always going to be. I'm old. I need a 3-day weekend. 2 days just doesn't cut it anymore. So tomorrow is the first full day of the weekend. We are going to relax. We are going to have fun. Maybe there'll be donuts. No one knows. One of the things that I'm really looking forward to tomorrow, Pat Quinn, former Illinois Governor Pat Quinn, he's going to join us tomorrow at the end of the day. Pat Quinn is always causing good trouble, and he is really fun to talk to about it on the radio. So gather your donuts by the radio or in front of your computer, and we will kick the weekend off tomorrow. Driving It Home with Patty Vasquez is up next. She has quite a large number of guestesses today. Sebastian Vargo and Taylor Hanna. They are Chicago-based chefs. Ben Caminos, host of Outside the Box with Ben Caminos on Substack. Joel Dinerstein, professor of English at Tulane University and author of the new book, The Last of the Ellis Island Jews, a Brooklyn Memoir. Tomorrow, Richard Chu kicks us off, as you well know by now, every day at 6 a.m. He's got a lot of guests as well. Do I sound like I'm slacking tomorrow? I keep saying Patty has a lot of guests. Richard has a lot of guests. Well, what about you, Joan? Don't you have a lot of guests? I got 3 guests. That's plenty for me tomorrow, because, it's Friday, and the first half of the show, up until 3:30, we talk about the news of the week, you and me. I read your texts. I talk to you live on the radio, and that is a beautiful way for us to slide into the weekend. So getting back to Richard Chu, his guests tomorrow, Christelle Spain, chair of the South Carolina Democratic Party, Karen Byrne, of course, from True Blue Podcast, Youngmi Kim, a UW-Madison journalism and political science professor, and, let's see, is it that time? Yes, it is. It is the first Friday of the month, and you know what that means. Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson is going to be on the airwaves with Richard Chu. I don't know. I have to talk to Richard. I don't know if they take calls, but the time goes so fast. They may just talk about the big things going on in the city of Chicago, and goodness knows they might not have a lot of extra time to do anything else. Okay, since this night, Thursday night, is now the last night before the weekend, are you with me so far? I am going to give you the homework that I used to give you when the weekend was only 2 days and we wrapped things up on Friday night. You've got to find something that brings you joy, that brings you zen, that reminds you why you're in the fight. You may have seen this was kind of breaking news I didn't get a chance to talk about earlier. You know how Rand Paul made Dr. Fauci come in and testify before a Senate committee where he was basically abused up one side and down the other. Then they didn't send this to the full Senate. I don't think they would have gotten this, but they had a Senate panel vote to hold Dr. Fauci in contempt because he knew that this wasn't a serious inquiry. He knew this was just a way to humiliate and harass him. So on the advice of his attorney, every time they asked him a question, he just said, on the advice of my attorney, I am going to take the Fifth Amendment. And he said it over and over again for 3 hours. Donald Trump has done that, and nobody said anything about it. Jim Jordan won't even respond to a subpoena, won't appear even though he's been subpoenaed. Nobody really has a problem with that. Dr. Fauci shows up. He takes what is his legal right. He is found to be in contempt, and because they just can't let this go. This afternoon, it was revealed that there are Republicans who are asking the Department of Justice, yes, that bastion of morality, Ted Blanche, they're asking the Department of Justice to prosecute Anthony Fauci. Yep. And I don't know, Jeanine Pirro surprised us by pulling the plug on some prosecutions that she felt she couldn't win. I wonder if Todd Blanche will be able to duck this. But there are calls from certain Republicans to the Department of Justice that Anthony Fauci needs to be prosecuted. I don't know what to say. What's there to say to that? Except it's awful. I will see you tomorrow at 2:00. Until then, have a great evening and good night.